I'm Samantha Reynolds, 32, and until 6 months ago, I was the cherished daughter of one of America's wealthiest business moguls. That was before my father slapped me across the face at my own engagement party and announced I would never see a penny of the Reynolds fortune. What should have been the happiest night of my life shattered into a nightmare when Dad publicly disowned me. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. When a team of lawyers revealed the truth that would unravel my entire existence, I wasn't a Reynolds at all. I was stolen. Before we dive into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and join me on this unbelievable journey of discovering who I really am. This story changed my entire life, and I promise it'll leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family. Growing up as a Reynolds meant living a life most people only dream about. Our primary residence was a 20-acre estate in Connecticut with manicured gardens that looked like something from a fairy tale. The main house had 14 bedrooms, an indoor and outdoor pool, a private movie theater, and a ballroom where my parents hosted the kind of galas that made the society pages. But that was just our home base. We also had the Manhattan penthouse, the ski chalet in Aspen, the beachfront property in the Hamptons, and my personal favorite, our villa in the south of France. Our private jet whisked us between these locations depending on the season or my father's business needs. Richard Reynolds was not just wealthy. He was American royalty. Reynolds Enterprises had holdings in everything from tech to real estate to pharmaceuticals. Forbes regularly featured him, and his net worth fluctuated between $4 and $6 billion depending on the market. Despite this enormous privilege, I'd like to think I grew up relatively grounded. My father had built his empire from a modest inheritance, and he was determined his children would understand the value of work. My older brother, Alexander Alex, to the family, was being groomed to take over the company from a young age. My sister Elizabeth Liz pursued her passion for art with our father's blessing, but she still interned at Reynolds Enterprises every summer. And then there was me, the baby of the family daddy's little girl. My relationship with my father was special. Every Sunday morning we had breakfast together, just the two of us. Even when he was traveling, he'd arrange to video call me at our regular time. As I got older, these breakfasts evolved into business discussions. Dad would explain complex deals he was working on, asking for my thoughts, genuinely listening to my ideas. "You've got the Reynolds business instinct, Sammy," he would tell me, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. Those eyes. I never thought much about how mine were brown while my father's, mother's, and siblings were all blue. Just like I never questioned why my hair was a darker shade than theirs, or why there were no photos of me as a newborn in our family albums. The earliest pictures of me in those expensive leather-bound books showed a toddler of about 2, not an infant. Mom always said the earlier photos were lost when we moved houses, and I believed her without question. Our family traditions were the anchors of my childhood. Every July, we would spend 3 weeks on our private island in the Caribbean. Dad would temporarily step back from work, and we'd have him all to ourselves. Mom would relax her usually perfect appearance, wearing sundresses with her hair in a casual ponytail. Alex would teach me to snorkel in the crystal-clear waters, and Liz would paint landscapes of the beach that later hung in our various homes. Christmas was always at the Connecticut estate. The 30-foot tree in the main hall became legendary among our social circle. Mom supervised the decorating herself, refusing to hire designers like other wealthy families. "Christmas is personal," she'd say. We all had our special ornaments, and every year we'd each add a new one that represented something important that had happened that year. Following in my father's footsteps, I attended Harvard Business School after completing my undergraduate degree at Yale. I worked twice as hard as everyone else, determined to prove I wasn't just there because of my last name. I graduated with honors, and the pride in my father's eyes that day meant everything to me. After graduation, I moved back to New York and took an entry-level position at Reynolds Enterprises. I wanted to earn my way up, though many whispered about nepotism behind my back. I didn't care. I knew Dad was actually harder on me than other employees. I had to prove myself twice over, but I was making progress, earning respect on my own merits. By 30, I was heading the company's emerging technologies division and had overseen several successful acquisitions. That's when I met Nathan Carter at a charity gala benefiting education in underserved communities. He wasn't part of our usual social circle. He'd built his tech company from nothing, a true self-made success story. Nathan was brilliant, kind, and completely unimpressed by the Reynolds name, which was refreshing. He challenged me intellectually and made me laugh harder than anyone I'd ever met. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Within 8 months, we were practically inseparable. Dad seemed to approve of Nathan, which was a relief. Richard Reynolds had scared away more than one of my previous boyfriends with his intimidating questions and background checks. But with Nathan, Dad actually seemed impressed. He's built something real, he told me after their first dinner together. I respect that. Nathan proposed on a perfect summer evening aboard the family yacht. As the sun set over the Manhattan skyline, he dropped to one knee with a vintage emerald-cut diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. It wasn't as large or flawless as the jewelry I'd grown up around, but it meant infinitely more. This was real. This was love. We decided to host our engagement party at the Connecticut estate. Mom threw herself into the planning with enthusiasm, ordering exotic flowers, hiring the best caterer on the East Coast, and having custom invitations hand-delivered to 200 of our closest friends and business associates. Everything was falling into place for what should have been the beginning of my happily ever after. If only I had paid more attention to the warning signs that were already appearing. If only I'd realized that my perfect life was built on a foundation of lies that was about to crumble beneath my feet. The first hint that something was wrong came about 3 weeks before the engagement party. I'd stopped by the estate to discuss decoration details with my mother when I encountered my father in his study. Normally, he'd greet me with a warm hug and ask about my day, but this time he barely looked up from his computer. "Hi, Daddy," I said, leaning down to kiss his cheek. He flinched, actually flinched at my touch. "Samantha," he said stiffly, "I didn't know you were coming by today. Just helping Mom with some party planning. Is everything okay? You seem tense." "Fine. Just busy. You should go find your mother." He turned back to his computer, effectively dismissing me. I told myself he was stressed about work. Reynolds Enterprises was in the middle of a major acquisition, and Dad always got intense during big deals. Still, the coldness in his voice lingered in my mind. Over the next few weeks, things only got stranger. I noticed Mom's eyes were often red and puffy, as though she'd been crying. When I asked her about it, she blamed allergies, but I'd never known her to have any. One afternoon, I arrived at the house unexpectedly and heard raised voices coming from the main library. I paused in the hallway, not meaning to eavesdrop, but concerned by the anger in my father's tone. "We should have told her years ago, Eleanor," he shouted. My mother's voice was pleading. "Please, Richard. Not now. Not right before her engagement party. We can figure this out after." "Figure what out? There's nothing to figure out. The truth is the truth." Their voices lowered then, and I couldn't make out anything else. But the conversation left me unsettled. What truth were they talking about? What had they been keeping from me? A few days later, Harold Winters, our family lawyer since before I was born, came to the house for what appeared to be a highly private meeting with my parents. Harold had always been warm toward me, often bringing me little presents when I was a child. But that day, he barely met my eyes when we passed in the hall, and there was something like pity in his expression that made my stomach twist. Increasingly concerned, I decided to look through some family records kept in Dad's home office while my parents were out at a charity function. I wasn't proud of snooping, but something felt terribly wrong and no one was talking to me. In the bottom drawer of his desk, I found a folder containing all our birth certificates and other important documents. Alex's was there. Liz's was there. But mine was missing. I searched every folder in the drawer but found nothing. Why would my birth certificate be missing when all other family documents were meticulously organized? The strange atmosphere extended to my siblings as well. When we met for our monthly lunch, both Alex and Liz seemed uncomfortable around me. They avoided making eye contact, and their conversation felt forced. When I mentioned the upcoming engagement party, Alex suddenly became very interested in his napkin. Is there something going on that I should know about? I finally asked directly. They exchanged a look that confirmed my suspicions. You should talk to Dad, Alex said carefully. About what, Alex? You're scaring me. It's not our place, Liz interjected. Just talk to Dad, okay? Later that week, I was looking for a particular photo album to show Nathan some childhood pictures when I came across my father in his study late at night. He didn't notice me in the doorway, and I was struck by how aged he suddenly looked, hunched over his desk with a glass of scotch in hand. He was staring at what appeared to be an old newspaper clipping. I quietly backed away, not wanting to disturb what seemed like a private moment. Only later would I realize that newspaper was likely the first report of a missing toddler in Michigan, a little girl taken from a shopping mall while her mother was momentarily distracted. A little girl named Emily Mitchell. Me. The night before the pre-engagement dinner, I finally confronted my mother directly. I found her in her dressing room preparing for bed. Mom, what's going on? Everyone's acting strange. Dad can barely look at me. You've been crying. Alex and Liz are walking on eggshells around me. Please just tell me what's happening. She froze her hand halfway to her face with a cream-soaked cotton pad. Nothing's wrong, darling. Everyone's just stressed about making sure the party is perfect. That's not it, and you know it. I heard you and Dad arguing about telling the truth. What truth, Mom? For a moment, I thought she might break, might actually tell me. Her eyes welled with tears and her hand trembled. But then her expression hardened. You're imagining things, Samantha. Your father and I argue about business matters sometimes. That's all. I left her room more confused and worried than before. That night at the pre-engagement dinner with our closest family friends, an elderly woman who had known my parents for decades made a comment that would later seem prophetic. You look nothing like your mother, dear, she said, examining my face after perhaps one too many glasses of champagne. Always wondered about that. My mother quickly changed the subject, but the comment lingered in my mind. Later that night, Nathan held me close in bed. Are you sure you don't want to postpone the party? He asked gently. Something's obviously going on with your family. We could wait until things settle down. I shook my head, determined to push through whatever this strange tension was. No, I've been dreaming about this engagement party my whole life. Whatever's going on, they'll have to put it aside for one night. Everything will be perfect. You'll see. How wrong I was. How terribly, catastrophically wrong. The day of the engagement party arrived, and despite my lingering concerns, I couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement as I watched the estate transform. Mom had outdone herself with the decorations. The grand ballroom sparkled with thousands of tiny lights strung across the ceiling like stars. White roses and orchids adorned every surface, their sweet scent filling the air. Crystal champagne flutes caught the light from the antique chandeliers, sending prisms of color dancing across the marble floor. I spent the morning at an exclusive spa in Manhattan with Liz, and my closest friends being pampered with facials, massages, and hairstyling. By the time my makeup artist put the finishing touches on my look, I almost felt like myself again. The woman staring back at me from the mirror looked confident, happy, and completely unaware that her life was about to implode. My dress was a custom Valentino, an elegant column of pale gold silk that made my olive skin glow. Nathan's eyes widened when he saw me, and the love in his expression momentarily pushed away all my worries. You look incredible, he whispered, kissing me softly. So do you. And he did perfectly handsome in his black tuxedo, his dark hair slightly tousled in the way that always made my heart race. Ready to face the crowd, he asked, offering me his arm. I nodded, taking a deep breath. As long as we're together. The first hour of the party went surprisingly well. The estate filled with guests, business associates of my father, friends from college, celebrities, politicians, and the cream of New York society. Everyone was congratulating us, the champagne was flowing freely, and even my father seemed to have shaken off whatever had been bothering him. He was charming and jovial, shaking hands and laughing with guests as if nothing was wrong. I began to relax. Maybe I'd been overthinking things. Maybe whatever tension had existed was resolving itself. Maybe this night would be everything I had hoped for after all. As tradition dictated after dinner, my father rose to give a toast. The room quieted as Richard Reynolds, imposing and distinguished in his tuxedo, tapped his crystal glass with a silver spoon. I smiled up at him, feeling a rush of love for the man who had given me everything. Friends, family, esteemed colleagues, he began, his voice strong and confident as it always was when he addressed a crowd. Today we gather to celebrate the engagement of my youngest daughter, Samantha, to Nathan Carter. He turned to Nathan with what appeared to be genuine approval. Nathan, you've proven yourself to be a man of integrity, intelligence, and vision. Building your company from nothing into the success it is today shows remarkable character. I couldn't have chosen better for my daughter if I'd tried. Nathan nodded appreciatively, squeezing my hand under the table. So far, so perfect. Samantha has always been special, Dad continued, and something in his tone made me tense slightly. From the moment she joined our family, she brought a unique light and energy. Joined our family. What an odd way to phrase it. But I brushed it aside as Dad continued. She's grown into a brilliant businesswoman in her own right, and I've always been proud to call her a Reynolds. Always been proud. Past tense. A chill ran down my spine. That's when I noticed the shift. My father's expression hardened, his jaw tightening in a way I recognized from when he was about to make a difficult business decision. His eyes, which had been warm just moments before, turned cold as ice, which makes what I'm about to say all the more difficult. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Samantha has betrayed this family's trust in the most fundamental way. My heart stopped. What was he talking about? An internal audit has revealed that funds have been systematically diverted from Reynolds Enterprises accounts over the past year. The evidence points directly to Samantha. Gasps echoed around the room. I felt the blood drain from my face. Dad, what are you talking about? I stood up, my voice shaking. I would never. Don't, he held up his hand, silencing me. Don't compound your betrayal with lies. We have proof. What proof? Nathan stood beside me, his arm protectively around my waist. Richard, there must be some mistake. My father ignored him, addressing the shocked crowd instead. I cannot in good conscience allow someone who would steal from her own family to inherit any part of what I've built. Therefore, as of tonight, Samantha is cut from my will. She will receive nothing from the Reynolds fortune. She is in every way that matters no longer a Reynolds. And then it happened. As I approached him, begging him to listen, to understand that there must be some horrible mistake, my father did something he had never done before. His hand came up in a flash of movement, and I felt the stinging impact of his palm against my cheek. The slap echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. I staggered backward, my hand going to my burning cheek, too shocked to even cry. My mother gasped but remained, seated, her hands clutching the tablecloth. Alex looked down at his plate, his face ashen. Liz had tears streaming down her face but wouldn't meet my eyes. No one moved to defend me. No one spoke up to challenge the outrageous accusations. Get out, my father, said, his voice deadly quiet. Security will escort you off the property. Do not attempt to contact me or any member of this family again. Nathan's arm tightened around me. We're leaving, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. But not because what you're saying is true. We're leaving because I won't let you treat the woman I love this way for another second. The walk out of that ballroom was the longest of my life. Hundreds of eyes watched as we moved toward the exit, whispers already starting behind cupped hands. Society's elite love, nothing more than a scandal, and Richard Reynolds publicly disowning his daughter was the juiciest one they'd had in years. Outside, Nathan guided me to his car, his hand steady on my back, even as I began to shake uncontrollably. I didn't do it, I kept saying. Nathan, I swear I didn't take any money. I would never. I know, he said firmly, helping me into the passenger seat. I know you, Samantha. I believe you. We drove in silence to Nathan's Manhattan apartment, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had my father truly lost his mind? Was this why he'd been acting so strangely, but why accuse me of theft? Nothing made sense. As Nathan poured me a glass of water in his kitchen, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer it, assuming it would be a reporter already hunting for details of the scandal. But when I saw Harold Winter's name on the screen, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps he could explain what was happening. Samantha Harold's voice was grave. "I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. There's something you need to know." "Harold, what is going on? My father just accused me of stealing from the company in front of everyone we know. You know I would never do that." There was a long pause on the line. When Harold spoke again, his voice was heavy with what sounded like regret. "This isn't about money, Samantha. It's about something much more complicated. I can't discuss it over the phone. My office 8 a.m. tomorrow. And Samantha, you might want to bring Nathan with you." The call ended, leaving me staring at Nathan with fresh terror in my heart. If this wasn't about money, what could possibly be worse than what had already happened? Nathan and I arrived at Harold Winter's law office at exactly 8 a.m. I hadn't slept more than 20 minutes the entire night, my mind racing with terrible scenarios of what could be waiting for me. Nathan looked equally exhausted, but determinedly supportive, his hand never leaving mine. Harold's secretary ushered us directly into his office, a space I had visited dozens of times throughout my life. The familiar surroundings, the antique desk, the wall of leather-bound law books, the subtle scent of lemon polish usually brought me comfort. Today they only heightened my anxiety. Harold stood as we entered, looking every one of his 65 years. The normally immaculate lawyer seemed rumpled, as though he too had passed a sleepless night. "Samantha, Nathan," he nodded to each of us. "Please sit down." I perched on the edge of one of the leather chairs, too tense to relax into it. "Harold, please tell me what's going on. Why would my father accuse me of stealing? Why would he hit me? None of this makes any sense." Harold adjusted his glasses, his movements deliberately slow, as though he was stalling. Finally, he opened a folder on his desk and looked directly at me. "Samantha, what I'm about to tell you is going to be extremely difficult to hear. I want you to know that I only learned the truth myself very recently, or I would have." He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "Well, that's not important now. What's important is that you understand the facts. Just tell me, Harold," I pleaded. He nodded, pulling out a document. "3 months ago, your father decided to update his will and insurance policies. As part of that process, he underwent a standard DNA test required by the insurance company. The results—" Harold paused, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "The results indicated that you are not biologically related to either Richard or Eleanor Reynolds." The words hit me like another slap. "What? That's impossible. There must be a mistake in the test." Richard had the test repeated twice. The results were conclusive. So I'm what, adopted? Even as I said it, I knew that couldn't be right. My parents had never mentioned adoption. There had never been any hint. "No, Samantha. You were not legally adopted by the Reynolds family." Nathan leaned forward. "What exactly are you saying, Harold?" Harold pulled out another document, what looked like a newspaper clipping preserved in a plastic sleeve. He slid it across the desk toward me. "After receiving the DNA results, Richard hired private investigators. They found this." With trembling hands, I picked up the plastic sleeve. It contained a yellowed newspaper article with a headline that sent ice through my veins: "Toddler abducted from Michigan Mall, parents desperate for answers." Below the headline was a photo of a smiling baby girl with dark hair and eyes that matched mine exactly. The caption read, "Emily Mitchell, 18 months, disappeared while shopping with her mother on Tuesday." The room seemed to tilt around me. Nathan steadied me with his hand on my back as I forced myself to read the article. It described how a little girl had vanished from a shopping mall in Grand Rapids, Michigan, while her mother was paying at a register just a few feet away. The date on the article was exactly 30 years earlier. "I don't understand," I whispered, though a terrible understanding was beginning to dawn. "Are you saying—" DNA comparison confirms it, Harold said gently. You are Emily Mitchell. You were kidnapped from your biological parents when you were a year and a half old. I dropped the article as if it had burned me. No, that's not possible. I'm Samantha Reynolds. I grew up in Connecticut. I went to Yale. My father is Richard Reynolds. Your biological parents are David and Jennifer Mitchell, Harold continued his voice, sympathetic but firm. They never stopped looking for you. Nathan's arm tightened around me. Wait, are you telling us that Richard and Eleanor Reynolds kidnapped a child, that they're the ones who took her from that mall? Harold shook his head quickly. The investigation hasn't determined that. Richard was genuinely shocked by the DNA results. He had no idea. A terrible thought struck me. But if he's known this for 3 months, if he knows I was kidnapped, why didn't he tell me? Why accuse me of stealing and publicly humiliate me? Harold looked uncomfortable. Richard's reaction has been complicated. Learning that the daughter he raised for 30 years wasn't his by blood was devastating to him. But discovering that she might have been brought into his life through a criminal act, he thinks I'm tainted, I realized, a bitter laugh escaping me. He thinks I'll bring scandal to the precious Reynolds name when this comes out. It's more complex than that, Samantha. Richard feels betrayed. He's angry, confused. He feels betrayed. My voice rose sharply. What about me? My entire life is a lie, and he's worried about himself. A wave of dizziness hit me, and I suddenly couldn't catch my breath. The room spun around me, the walls seeming to close in. I was vaguely aware of Nathan calling my name, of Harold rushing to get water, but it all seemed distant, unreal. This couldn't be happening. I couldn't be someone else. Some stolen child. Some victim. My life couldn't be built on a crime. My family couldn't be strangers. But as the panic attack gradually subsided, as Nathan helped me breathe through it, murmuring reassurances in my ear, the horrible truth settled into my bones. The missing birth certificate. The absence of baby photos. The different coloring from my family. It all made a terrible kind of sense. When I could speak again, I asked the question that frightened me most. If Richard didn't kidnap me, who did? Harold hesitated. That's what the investigators are still trying to determine. But even through my shock, I caught something in his expression. You know more than you're saying. Harold sighed heavily. There's a strong possibility that Eleanor was involved, though perhaps not directly in the kidnapping itself. My mother, the word felt strange on my tongue now. Was she my mother if we shared no blood? If she had been complicit in stealing me from my real parents? Richard has known about this for 3 months, Nathan said slowly. And he never said a word to Samantha. He let her continue believing she was his daughter, only to publicly humiliate and disown her. Why not just tell her privately? Harold looked genuinely regretful. I urged him to handle this differently, to tell you compassionately, to help you through the shock. But Richard, he's concerned about the company, about the scandal when this becomes public. He thought a clean break would be better for the Reynolds name. Better for the Reynolds name, I repeated numbly. Not better for me. I'm truly sorry, Samantha. If I had known sooner. I stood abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. Do they know? My real parents. The Mitchells. Do they know you've found me? Not yet. Richard wanted to handle the legal aspects first. There are complications. You mean he wanted to make sure I couldn't touch the Reynolds fortune? I said flatly. That's what last night was really about. Making sure I was publicly disowned before this came out. Harold didn't deny it, which was answer enough. I want to know everything I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Everything about the Mitchells, everything about how I ended up with the Reynolds family. Everything. Harold nodded. I've prepared a file with all the information we have so far. As he handed me a thick manila envelope, I asked the question that had been building since he first showed me the newspaper article. Are they still alive, my biological parents? Yes, Harold said softly. David and Jennifer Mitchell are still alive. They live in Michigan, where they've remained in the same house all these years. in case you ever found your way home. Home, the word echoed in my mind. I had never felt further from home in my life. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and days filled with discoveries that continued to shake the foundations of my identity. Nathan took a leave of absence from his company to be with me, turning his apartment into a war room of sorts as we pieced together the puzzle of my true origins. Against Harold's advice, I hired Marcus Blackwood, a private investigator with a reputation for being both ruthless and discreet. I needed answers Harold either couldn't or wouldn't provide, and I was willing to pay whatever it took to get them. I need to know everything about the Mitchells, I told Marcus during our first meeting. And I need to know exactly how I went from being their daughter to being a Reynolds. Marcus worked with a chilling efficiency, delivering his first report within days. The Mitchell family had been painfully ordinary. David, a high school English teacher, and Jennifer, a nurse, had been living a modest but happy life in Grand Rapids when their only child disappeared. They had never given up hope, maintaining a website dedicated to finding Emily, finding me for all these years. They updated on your birthday every year, Marcus said, showing me printouts of the simple site with its outdated design. The most recent post read Emily would be 32 today. Wherever you are, we love you, and we're still looking for you. I stared at the school photos they'd posted, age progression images created by specialists showing what I might look like at various ages. The most recent one, predicting my appearance at 30, was startlingly accurate. They never stopped looking, I whispered, touching the screen. For 30 years, they never gave up. The knowledge was both heartbreaking and comforting. Somewhere out there were two people who had loved me my entire life without ever seeing me grow up. The more difficult question was whether to contact them immediately. Nathan thought I should. They've been waiting for 3 decades, Sam. Imagine what it would mean to them to know you're alive and well. But I hesitated. I need to understand how this happened first. I need to know who took me from them before I can face them. Marcus's investigation continued, digging into Reynolds' family records and eventually uncovering a critical lead, Irene Morris, a nanny who had worked for the Reynolds family starting around the time I joined the family. She worked for them for about 5 years, Marcus explained, showing me employment records he'd obtained. Left when you would have been around 7. But here's where it gets interesting. Before working for the Reynolds, Irene Morris worked at a daycare center in Grand Rapids, Michigan. My heart skipped. The same city where I was kidnapped. Marcus nodded. The daycare was located less than a mile from the mall where Emily Mitchell disappeared. It was the first tangible connection, and it set my mind racing. Could this woman, this nanny I barely remembered, have been the one who stole me from my real parents? Further investigation revealed that Irene was still alive, living in a nursing home in Florida. But before I could arrange to confront her, I needed answers from the woman who had raised me as her daughter. I hadn't spoken to Eleanor since the disastrous engagement party. She hadn't reached out, and neither had Alex or Liz. The Reynolds family had closed ranks just as they always did in a crisis. But I was determined to break through. I arrived at the Connecticut estate, unannounced, knowing security would turn me away if I called ahead. The guard at the gate was new, didn't recognize me, and waved me through when I said I was Eleanor's daughter. At least that lie still worked. The housekeeper's eyes widened when she opened the door, but she wordlessly led me to the sunroom where Eleanor took her morning tea. 30 years of training and proper behavior prevented her from turning away family, even disowned family. Eleanor was alone, staring out at the gardens, a delicate porcelain cup untouched beside her. She had aged 10 years in 2 weeks, her face drawn new lines around her eyes and mouth. When she saw me, she froze, her hand going to her throat. "Samantha," she whispered, "you shouldn't be here." "I need the truth," I said, remaining standing, unwilling to take the seat she gestured to. "I know who I am. I know I was kidnapped. What I don't know is your role in it." Eleanor's face crumpled, tears immediately filling her eyes. "Please, you have to understand. Understand that you stole me from my real parents, that you've been living a lie for 30 years. I didn't steal you," she protested, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. Not at first." I stared at her, trying to see beyond the familiar face to the woman who might have committed an unforgivable crime. Tell me everything. Now. And she did. Through tears and halting breaths, Eleanor Reynolds confessed the truth she'd hidden for 3 decades. We tried for years to have a third child, she began. After Elizabeth, I had 4 miscarriages. The doctors said it was too dangerous to keep trying, but I was obsessed. Richard wanted to adopt, but I couldn't accept it. I wanted another baby that was ours. She described spiraling into depression, becoming desperate and unstable. Irene was my lady's maid then. She had worked for us for about a year, and she saw how devastated I was. She said she knew of a baby who needed a home, a little girl whose mother had died and whose father couldn't care for her. Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. She brought you to me one night. You were so beautiful with those big brown eyes. She said your name was Emily, but that we should change it for a fresh start. That your father didn't want to be found, didn't want you back. And you believed that, I demanded. You didn't think to question where she got a toddler. I didn't want to question it, Eleanor admitted, her voice small. I was so happy to have you. Richard was traveling, and by the time he came home, I had convinced myself the story was true. I told him we were fostering you with the intent to adopt. He arranged for new documents, a new identity. Samantha Reynolds was born. But there was never any legal adoption, I pressed. Because I wasn't an orphan, I was stolen. Eleanor's silence was admission enough. When did you know the truth? I asked, my voice hard. When did you realize I was kidnapped? She couldn't meet my eyes. About 6 months after Irene brought you to us, I saw a news story about a missing child from Michigan. There was a photo. You looked so similar. I confronted Irene, but she swore it wasn't the same child, that it was just a coincidence. And you believed her, or did you just want to believe her? I couldn't bear the thought of losing you, Eleanor whispered. I had already announced to everyone that we had adopted a little girl. You were already calling me Mommy. I convinced myself Irene was telling the truth. Did Richard know? Did he suspect anything? Eleanor shook her head vehemently. No, never. He believed what I told him, that you were a private adoption arranged through Irene's connections. He never questioned it. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture more twisted than I could have imagined. So when the DNA test came back, it wasn't just that I wasn't his biological child, it was the first time he realized I wasn't legally his child either. He was devastated, Eleanor said, furious with me for the deception. When the investigators connected you to the Mitchell kidnapping, he couldn't handle it. He said having you in the family would destroy everything he'd built when the truth came out. So he decided to destroy me first, I said bitterly. Cut me off, publicly discredit me, so when the kidnapping story broke, I would already be separated from the Reynolds name. Eleanor didn't deny it. I begged him to handle it differently, to talk to you privately. But Richard has always protected the company above all else. Above his daughter, I corrected. Above the child he raised for 30 years. He loves you, Eleanor insisted weakly. He's just lost right now. I laughed, a harsh sound that made her flinch. That's your defense. That kidnapping a child is excusable if you love them. That publicly humiliating me is okay because he's lost. Eleanor began to sob in earnest, but I felt no sympathy. All those years of thinking I was loved unconditionally, of believing I was part of something special, it had all been built on a terrible crime. Irene Morris, I said, bringing the conversation back to the woman who had started this nightmare. Where is she now? Through her tears, Eleanor told me what she knew. After leaving the Reynolds' employment, Irene had worked for several other wealthy families before retiring to Florida about 15 years ago. She was now in a nursing home in Miami, suffering from advancing dementia. As I turned to leave, Eleanor called after me, her voice desperate. Samantha, please. You're still my daughter. I raised you. I loved you. Doesn't that count for something? I paused at the door, looking back at the broken woman who had both saved and destroyed me. My name is Emily, I said quietly. And I don't know what love means to you, but to me it doesn't include stealing a child from her real parents and lying to her for 30 years. As I drove away from the estate for what I knew might be the last time Marcus called with one more critical piece of information, he had located photos in old society pages that confirmed Irene Morris had worked for both the Reynolds family and previously at the daycare in Grand Rapids. "I've got her," I told Nathan when I returned to his apartment. "I know who took me, and I'm going to confront her." The flight to Miami was tense. Nathan sat beside me, offering silent support as I stared out the window at clouds that seemed as turbulent as my emotions. We had debated whether I should make this trip at all, given Irene's condition. If she has dementia, she might not remember, Nathan had pointed out. Or worse, she might not be lucid enough for her answers to make sense. "I have to try," I'd insisted. "I need to hear it from her. I need to understand why she did this to me, to the Mitchells. I need to know if there was ever a moment of regret." Now, as our plane began its descent into Miami, I wondered if I was making a mistake. What if confronting my kidnapper only brought more pain? What if some questions were better left unanswered? Too late for doubts now. Marcus had arranged everything, contacting the nursing home director and explaining that I was Irene's niece wanting to visit my aunt, whom I hadn't seen in many years. The lie came easily, perhaps because I'd been living one my entire life. Palm Meadows Care Center was a far cry from the luxurious life Irene must have become accustomed to while working for families like the Reynolds. The building was clean, but dated with faded paint and worn furniture. The sharp scent of disinfectant failed to completely mask the underlying smells of age and illness. The director, a brisk woman named Mrs. Santiago, met us in the lobby. "Miss Morris doesn't get many visitors," she said as she led us down a corridor lined with wheelchairs and shuffling residents. "Some days are better than others with her memory. Today seems to be one of her clearer days." She stopped outside a door decorated with a generic floral wreath. "Just ring the call button if you need anything. Try not to upset her, it can trigger confusion." With a deep breath, I entered the room, Nathan close behind me. The woman in the recliner by the window barely resembled the stern-faced nanny I vaguely remembered from my early childhood. Irene Morris had shrunk her once imposing frame, now bird-like beneath a blue cardigan. Her white hair was neatly combed, her gnarled hands resting on a magazine in her lap. She looked up as we entered, her faded blue eyes showing mild curiosity but no recognition. "Hello, Irene," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Do you know who I am?" She squinted at me, tilting her head. "Are you from the physical therapy department? I already did my exercises today." "No," I moved closer, sitting in the chair opposite her. "Look at me closely. Do I remind you of anyone?" Irene studied me, a slight furrow appearing between her eyebrows. Suddenly her eyes widened, and her hand went to her mouth. "Emily," she whispered. The name, my real name on her lips, sent a shudder through me. "You recognize me," I said. "You remember." "Emily," she repeated, stronger this time. "Little Emily. But they call you something else now, don't they, the Reynolds girl?" "Samantha," I confirmed. "They named me Samantha." "A lovely name," Irene nodded, as if approving her own handiwork. "It suited you better than Emily. More elegant, more fitting for who you would become." The casualness of her tone, the absence of any shame or regret, ignited my anger. "You stole me," I said bluntly. "You took me from my parents, from people who loved me. Why?" Irene's expression didn't change, as though we were discussing the weather rather than a life-altering crime. "Mrs. Reynolds needed you more," she said simply. "She was so broken after the last miscarriage. The doctors said she might harm herself. When I saw you at the mall with your mother." She trailed off, seemingly lost in the memory. With my real mother, I prompted, my heart racing. "Jennifer Mitchell." "She wasn't watching you," Irene continued, a note of judgment in her voice. "You were reaching for a toy in the stroller, and she was paying for something at the counter, her back turned. So careless." She looked away for a moment. I said, my voice rising, "That doesn't give you the right to steal her child." Irene's eyes hardened, a glimpse of the woman she must have been 30 years ago, breaking through the frail exterior. I gave you a better life. The Mitchells were nobody, a teacher and a nurse living in a small house in Michigan. The Reynolds gave you everything: the best education, travel opportunities you never would have had otherwise. They gave me a life built on lies I countered. They stole my history, my identity, my choice. Eleanor didn't know at first, Irene said, an edge of defensiveness creeping into her voice. I told her you were an orphan. By the time she suspected the truth, she loved you too much to give you up. But you knew. You always knew. You saw the news reports, the searches, the devastated parents pleading for their baby's return. The Mitchells would have gotten over it eventually, Irene said dismissively. Most people do. Eleanor needed you more. The callousness of her statement left me breathless. Nathan, who had been silently observing from near the door, stepped forward, his face tight with anger. You ruined multiple lives because you decided who needed a child more, who gave you the right to play God with their lives. Irene's gaze shifted to Nathan, assessing him coolly. You don't understand the state Eleanor was in. I saved her, and I gave Emily Samantha a life of privilege few children could dream of. You didn't give me anything, I said, my voice shaking. You took everything from me. My real family. My true identity. And you left two innocent people to suffer for 30 years, never knowing what happened to their daughter. A nurse appeared in the doorway, attracted by our raised voices. Is everything all right in here? Irene's demeanor changed instantly, the sharp lucidity fading into confused elderly fragility. I don't know these people, she said plaintively to the nurse. Why are they asking me these questions? The nurse gave us a warning look. Miss Morris gets upset easily. Perhaps you should come back another day. We're not coming back, I said, rising from my chair. I looked down at the woman who had altered the course of my life with one selfish decision. One more question, Irene. Did you ever regret what you did? Did you ever think about the pain you caused? For a moment, clarity returned to her eyes. Regret is for people who make mistakes, she said coldly. I made a choice. The right choice for everyone involved. The nurse moved to usher us out, but I had heard enough. I had seen what I needed to see, not a monster, but something perhaps more terrifying, a human being who believed absolutely in her right to reshape others' lives according to her judgment. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. She doesn't even think she did anything wrong, I said to Nathan. All these years, all this pain, and she thinks she made the right choice. Nathan pulled me into his arms. She's wrong, Sam. What she did was unforgivable. As we left the nursing home, I made a call to the local police department. Marcus had already informed me that the statute of limitations for kidnapping had expired in this case. Irene would never face criminal charges for what she'd done. But the detective I spoke to was sympathetic, promising to take a statement that could be added to the now-closed Mitchell case file, providing at least some official record of what had happened. On the flight back to New York, I wrestled with what to do next. Confronting Irene had answered some questions, but created new ones. Should I press charges against Eleanor for her role in the kidnapping, even if she hadn't orchestrated it? Should I go public with the story exposing the Reynolds family's darkest secret, or should I simply try to move forward, focusing on connecting with my biological family? What would justice even look like in this situation, I asked Nathan as our plane began its descent into JFK. No court can give me back 30 years with my real parents. Maybe justice isn't about punishment, Nathan suggested gently. Maybe it's about truth, about everyone finally knowing who you really are. As we collected our luggage, my phone rang. It was Marcus. I've found current information on the Mitchells, he said without preamble. They're still in Grand Rapids, still in the same house they lived in when you disappeared. And I've got contact information whenever you're ready. I thanked him and ended the call, my heart racing. My biological parents were just a phone call away. But before I could reach out to them, I realized there was one more conversation I needed to have. I need to talk to Richard, I told Nathan. One more time. I spent the next 3 days in a haze of indecision. The information Marcus had given me about my biological parents burned in my mind. David and Jennifer Mitchell still lived in the same modest 4-bedroom house, where they had brought their baby daughter home from the hospital. They had never had other children. David had retired from teaching 2 years earlier, and Jennifer still worked part-time at the same hospital. I found myself studying the photos Marcus had obtained, searching for resemblances. I had David's eyes definitely. Jennifer's smile, perhaps. Both had dark hair like mine, a feature that had always set me apart from the blonde Reynolds family. Nathan gave me space to process, understanding this was a decision only I could make. Whatever you choose, he promised, I'm with you. On the third day, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously, half expecting a reporter who had somehow gotten wind of the story. Samantha, this is Grace Henderson. Grace had been a colleague of Richard's for decades, one of the few people he considered both a business associate and a friend. She had always been kind to me, remembering my birthdays with thoughtful gifts and showing genuine interest in my career. Grace, I said, surprised. How did you get my number? Harold gave it to me, she admitted. I hope that's all right. I wanted to talk to you about Richard. I tensed immediately. If he sent you to negotiate some kind of settlement. No, nothing like that, Grace interrupted. He doesn't know I'm calling. Samantha, I've known Richard for over 30 years. I've never seen him like this. Like what I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Concerned about his company's reputation, worried about scandal. Broken, Grace said quietly. He's broken, Samantha. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of concern. What do you mean? Grace sighed heavily. He's barely functioning. He's canceled meetings, delegated critical decisions to subordinates. He sits in his office staring at photos of you growing up. He loved you, Samantha. Regardless of blood, regardless of how you came into his life, you were his daughter in every way that matters to him. Then why did he do it? I demanded. Why humiliate me publicly? Why cut me off without even talking to me first? Because he's a proud, stubborn man who felt betrayed, Grace said bluntly. Not by you, never by you, but by Eleanor. Finding out his wife had lied to him for 30 years, that she had been complicit in a kidnapping. It shattered everything he thought he knew. He lashed out in anger and hurt. At me, I pointed out. He lashed out at me. Yes, and it was wrong, Grace agreed. I'm not defending what he did, just trying to help you understand it. Richard's always defined himself by his control, his certainty. Discovering his family was built on lies destroyed that certainty. He responded by trying to seize control of the narrative in the only way he knew how, by getting ahead of the scandal. I absorbed this in silence, conflicted by the surge of emotions her words evoked. Part of me still loved Richard Reynolds, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had proudly watched my graduation, who had discussed business strategies with me over countless Sunday breakfasts. But could I forgive what he had done? Why are you telling me this, Grace? Because I think you should talk to him before you make any decisions about contacting the Mitchells, she said. Not for his sake, but for yours. For closure, if nothing else. After ending the call, I paced Nathan's apartment for hours, weighing Grace's words. Nathan watched me with concern, but didn't push, letting me work through my thoughts. I think I need to see him, I finally said. One last time. Nathan nodded. Do you want me to come with you? No, I decided. This is something I need to do alone. The next morning, I drove to the Reynolds Enterprises headquarters in Manhattan, a gleaming skyscraper of steel and glass that had always filled me with pride. Now it just reminded me of everything I'd lost, or perhaps had never truly had. The security guard recognized me despite everything that had happened, though he looked uncomfortable as he called upstairs for clearance. I half expected to be turned away, but moments later he handed me a visitor's badge and directed me to the executive elevator. Richard's executive assistant's eyes widened when I stepped off the elevator, but she quickly composed herself. Miss Reynolds, she said, then flushed at her slip. It's fine, Diane, I said, forcing a smile. Is he available? He's not seeing anyone today, but... She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Go on in. I think he'll see you. I knocked once on the heavy wooden door of Richard's office before entering. The spacious corner office with its panoramic views of Manhattan had always impressed me, but today my attention was fixed solely on the man behind the massive desk. Grace had been right. Richard Reynolds looked diminished somehow. His usually immaculate appearance was slightly rumpled, his face haggard with new lines. He stared at me as though seeing a ghost. "Samantha," he said, his voice rough. He cleared his throat. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," I replied, taking in his disheveled appearance. I remained standing, unwilling to sit, as though this were a normal business meeting. I came for answers. Richard gestured to the chair across from his desk, but I shook my head. He sighed, then stood and moved to the floor to ceiling windows looking out at the city below. "What do you want to know?" he asked, his back to me. "The truth," I said simply. "All of it. When did you find out? What did you do then? And why did you handle it the way you did?" Richard was silent for a long moment. "I had a routine physical 3 months ago," he finally said. "The insurance company required a DNA test for the new policy I was taking out. When the results came back, he trailed off his shoulders, slumping. At first, I thought there had been a mistake. I had them run the test again. Then a third time. He turned to face me, and I was startled to see his eyes were red-rimmed. When I confronted Eleanor, she broke down. Told me everything about the miscarriages, about Irene bringing you to her, about her suspicions that you might have been the missing child from the news. "And you never suspected?" I asked. "In 30 years, you never wondered why there were no baby pictures of me? Why I looked nothing like you or Eleanor or Alex or Liz?" "I thought you looked like my mother," Richard said, quietly. "She had darker hair, darker eyes. I assumed you took after her side of the family." I almost laughed at the irony. All those years of thinking I didn't quite fit in, and Richard had been creating his own explanation that allowed him to see me as his. "What did you do after Eleanor told you the truth?" "I hired investigators," Richard said, moving back to his desk, but not sitting. "I had to know for certain. When they connected you to the Mitchell case," he shook his head. "I was in shock, angry, terrified of the implications. So you decided to preemptively disown me," I said flatly. "To protect the Reynolds name from scandal." Richard winced. I wasn't thinking clearly. All I could see was the inevitable media firestorm, the damage to the company, the legal ramifications. "I thought if I separated you from the family publicly first, it would minimize the impact when the story broke." "You weren't protecting the company," I said, my voice rising. "You were protecting yourself, your reputation, your legacy. You threw away 30 years of being my father to avoid embarrassment." "It wasn't just about embarrassment," Richard countered, a flash of his old fire returning. "There could be serious legal consequences. The company's stock would plummet if it came out that Eleanor Reynolds was involved in a kidnapping. Thousands of employees could lose their jobs. Pensions could be wiped out. So you sacrificed me instead," I said bitterly. "The daughter you claimed to love." Richard seemed to deflate before my eyes. "I made a terrible mistake," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I was angry, hurt, scared. I lashed out at the wrong person. By the time I realized what I'd done, it seemed too late to take it back." "It was too late," I agreed. "You can't undo what happened at that party. You can't take back that slap or those accusations." "I know," Richard said, and to my shock his eyes filled with tears. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Samantha. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that despite everything, despite how you came into our lives, you were my daughter. I loved you. I still love you." I stared at this broken version of the powerful man who had raised me unsure what to feel. Part of me wanted to scream at him to make him feel the pain and humiliation he had caused me. Another part, the little girl who had adored her daddy, wanted to forgive him, to find some way back to the relationship we'd had. "I'm not Samantha," I said finally. "Not really. I'm Emily Mitchell. I have parents, real parents, who have been waiting for me for 30 years. Parents who never gave up looking for me, who kept my room ready, who updated a website on my birthday every year just in case I might somehow find my way back to them." Richard nodded, pain etched into every line of his face. "I understand. You should meet them." They deserve to know their daughter is alive and well. And what about Eleanor? I asked. Will there be consequences for her role in all this? Eleanor and I are separating, Richard said heavily. Whether there will be legal consequences depends partly on you. The statute of limitations has expired for Irene, but Eleanor's complicity. He spread his hands. It's your decision whether to pursue that. I hadn't expected that. The power to potentially send the woman who raised me to prison was not something I had wanted. I don't know what I'm going to do about Eleanor, I admitted. But I do know I'm going to contact the Mitchells. I need to know who I really am, where I come from. Richard moved around the desk, approaching me cautiously. Whatever you decide about your future, about the Mitchells, about Eleanor, I want to help. Not to control the situation, not to protect the Reynolds name, but to try in some small way to make amends. I don't want your money, I said sharply. I'm not offering money, Richard replied, though that's available if you ever need it. I'm offering to help facilitate your meeting with the Mitchells if you want. To provide whatever support you need during this transition, to be whatever you need me to be. I studied him, searching for signs of manipulation or ulterior motives, but saw only genuine regret. I don't know what I need from you right now, I said honestly. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I understand, Richard said. But the offer stands regardless. As I turned to leave, Richard called after me. Samantha, Emily, there's one more thing you should know. I've established a trust for the Mitchells. It can never compensate for what was taken from them, but it might help with whatever they need now. I paused at the door, surprised by this gesture. You did that without being asked. Without legal obligation. Richard nodded. It was the right thing to do. I left the office with more questions than answers, but also with a strange sense of peace. The conversation hadn't erased the hurt or repaired the trust that had been shattered, but it had given me what I needed to move forward. That night, with Nathan by my side, I made the call that would change everything once again. The phone rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered. Hello? My heart pounded. Mrs. Mitchell, Jennifer Mitchell. Yes, this is she. I took a deep breath, squeezing Nathan's hand for courage. My name is Samantha Reynolds, but I think you might know me by another name. Emily, your daughter. The 2 weeks following that first phone call were a whirlwind of emotions. Jennifer Mitchell had initially thought my call was a cruel prank. They had received many over the years from people claiming to be their missing daughter or to know what had happened to her. It was only after I provided specific details from the kidnapping that were never made public, and after Marcus sent them the evidence he had gathered, that they began to believe. We agreed to meet in person, but the question of where posed its own challenges. They wanted me to come to Grand Rapids, to the home where I should have grown up. I wanted neutral territory somewhere without the weight of either family's history. In the end, Richard surprised me by offering his rarely used lake house in upstate New York as a meeting place. It was secluded, peaceful, and equidistant between New York and Michigan, a symbolic middle ground. Are you ready for this? Nathan asked as we drove the winding roads toward the lake on the morning of the meeting. He had been my rock throughout the entire ordeal, never judging, always supporting. No, I admitted. But I don't think I ever could be fully ready to meet the parents I was stolen from 30 years ago. The Mitchells arrived precisely at noon, their rental car pulling up to the lake house, just as Nathan and I were arranging refreshments on the deck overlooking the water. I watched from the window as they emerged from the car, a slender woman with silver-streaked dark hair and a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, both appearing to be in their early 60s. They paused at the foot of the driveway, holding hands, gathering courage just as I was. The woman Jennifer, my biological mother, looked up at the house, and even through the window I could see the mixture of hope and terror on her face. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the porch. For a moment, we all froze, staring at each other across the distance. Then slowly, I walked down the steps toward them. The first thing that struck me was how familiar they seemed. David Mitchell had my eyes, exactly the same deep brown, the same slight crinkle at the corners. Jennifer had the same heart-shaped face that I saw in the mirror every morning. And when she gasped at the sight of me, I recognized my own expression of surprise. "Emily," she whispered, her hand rising to cover her mouth. I had thought I would maintain some composure, that we would ease into this strange reunion with cautious conversation. But something primal and instinctive took over. In 3 quick strides, I crossed the remaining distance and found myself enveloped in Jennifer's arms, her tears soaking my shoulder as mine dampened her hair. David joined the embrace a moment later, his large hands trembling as they touched my back, as if ensuring I was real and not another dream that would dissolve upon waking. We stood like that for a long time, 3 people connected by blood, but strangers in experience, letting decades of loss and longing flow through tears. When we finally separated, Jennifer's hands remained on my face, her eyes drinking in every feature. "You look so much like my mother," she said wonderingly. "She always said you'd have her chin, and she was right." The mention of a grandmother I had never known sent a fresh pang through me. How many family members had I lost the chance to know? How many connections had been severed by Irene's selfish act? Nathan appeared then, quietly introducing himself and guiding us all to the deck where he had tactfully arranged comfortable seating and refreshments. His presence helped ground me as the Mitchells, and I began the surreal process of getting to know each other. They had brought a small photo album, and we paged through it together. There I was, as a newborn, swaddled in a pink blanket with a tiny face peeking out the baby pictures I had never had in the Reynolds albums. There was my first birthday, smiling with chocolate cake smeared across my face. And there I was, at 18 months, just weeks before the kidnapping, toddling across their living room carpet with a stuffed rabbit clutched in my chubby hands. "We called him Mr. Hops," Jennifer said, touching the image of the toy. "You wouldn't sleep without him." "What was I like?" I asked. Before I was taken." David smiled, though his eyes remained sad. "Stubborn. Curious about everything. You had just started putting sentences together. Your first full sentence was, 'Daddy, read book.' And after that we couldn't read enough books to satisfy you. You loved music," Jennifer added. "Anytime David played the piano, you would dance around the living room spinning until you got dizzy and fell down laughing." "You play the piano?" I asked David, surprised by this connection. He nodded. "I still do. Taught music along with English at the high school." "I play too," I said softly. "I started lessons when I was 6. It always felt natural." The discovery of this inherited trait, something that connected me to my biological father across the years of separation, affected me deeply. What other parts of myself had come from these people? What talents, tendencies, or traits that I had always thought were uniquely mine were actually genetic inheritances? As the afternoon progressed, we shared our stories. I told them about growing up as Samantha Reynolds, about my education and career. They told me about their decades-long search, the police investigations that went cold, the psychics they consulted in desperation, the age progression photos they posted every year. "We never gave up," David said firmly. "Some people thought we were crazy for keeping your room ready all these years. They said we needed to move on. But we knew somehow that you were still out there." "Your room?" I asked. Jennifer nodded. "We kept it, updated it, as you would have grown. It has a desk for a teenager now, and a double bed instead of the toddler bed. But the walls are still the same, pale yellow, and Mr. Hops is still waiting on the pillow." The thought of this room aging with a child who wasn't there brought fresh tears to my eyes. I learned they had also maintained a small memorial garden in their backyard, planting a new rose bush on each of my birthdays. "Did you ever think about having other children?" I asked, immediately regretting the question when I saw the pain it caused. "We tried," Jennifer said after a moment. "About 5 years after you disappeared. But I had complications during the pregnancy, and afterward the doctors said I couldn't have any more children. Maybe it was for the best. I'm not sure my heart could have opened to another child while I was still searching for you." We discussed the Reynolds family as well, though I was careful about how much I revealed. Despite everything, I felt oddly protective of Eleanor and Richard. The Mitchells were remarkably understanding about my complicated feelings. "They raised you," David said simply. Whatever their faults, whatever wrongs were committed, they're part of who you are. We can't change that, and we wouldn't want to erase the good parts of your upbringing. Even knowing what Eleanor did, I asked, surprised by their generosity of spirit. We've had 30 years to work through our anger, Jennifer explained. It nearly destroyed us at first. But eventually we had to find a way to live with what happened, without letting the bitterness consume us. Will you press charges against her? I asked. The Mitchells exchanged a look. We've discussed it, David said. The statute of limitations is complex in a case like this. But ultimately, we're more focused on rebuilding our relationship with you than pursuing legal vengeance. By the time evening fell, we had made remarkable progress in bridging the 30-year gap between us. We had discovered shared interests, similar mannerisms, even the same allergy to strawberries. I had learned about the grandparents I never knew, the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had kept my memory alive all these years. You have an extended family eager to meet you, Jennifer said. Whenever you're ready. As they prepared to leave, promising to return the next day for another visit, David hesitated. There's something we want to ask, but we don't want to pressure you, he said. We understand your life is established as Samantha Reynolds. We don't expect you to suddenly become Emily Mitchell again. But we wondered if you might consider incorporating Emily somehow, perhaps as a middle name. The request touched me deeply. Actually, I said, I've been thinking about that. I'm not sure who I am anymore, Samantha or Emily. But maybe I don't have to choose. Maybe I can be both. Samantha, Emily Reynolds Mitchell Jennifer said, trying it out. It's a mouthful, but it honors all of who you are. Reynolds Mitchell, I repeated, liking the sound of it, the way it acknowledged both the life I had lived and the one that had been taken from me. The next few months were a period of profound adjustment. I spent more time with the Mitchells visiting Grand Rapids to see the house where I should have grown up, the neighborhood where I should have played, the schools I should have attended. I met extended family members who welcomed me with open arms and tears of joy. I also began the legal process of reclaiming my identity, filing paperwork to officially add Emily and Mitchell to my name. The media eventually got wind of the story, of course, but Richard surprised me by using his considerable influence to minimize the sensationalism. He gave one carefully worded statement, acknowledging that the Reynolds family had unwittingly raised a child who had been kidnapped, expressing deep regret for the pain caused to the Mitchells, and asking for privacy as all families involved navigated this complex situation. Eleanor entered therapy to address her role in what had happened. While I wasn't ready to forgive her, I chose not to press charges, partly out of compassion and partly because, as David had said, I wanted to focus on rebuilding rather than retribution. Nathan and I rescheduled our engagement party, a much smaller, more intimate gathering that included both the Mitchells and, after much consideration, Richard and my siblings. Eleanor wasn't ready to face the Mitchells, and frankly, I wasn't ready for her to be there either. The meeting between Richard and the Mitchells was tense, but ultimately respectful. They shared a bond, after all. Both had loved and raised me in their own ways. He seems like a good man, David said afterward, surprising me. Misguided in how he handled things when he found out, but I can see he loves you. We don't expect you to choose between families, Jennifer added. We've lost too many years to create more division now. Their generosity of spirit humbled me. These people who had every right to be bitter, angry, and vengeful chose forgiveness and reconciliation instead. It was a profound lesson in what family could and should be. As our wedding date approached, Nathan and I made the decision to have both Richard and David walk me down the aisle, a symbol of my embracing both parts of my identity. Jennifer would sit in the traditional mother of the bride seat, while Alex and Liz had roles in the wedding party alongside cousins I was just getting to know. Are you sure about this? Nathan asked one night as we finalized the arrangements. It's going to be complicated. I smiled, feeling more certain than I had about anything in months. My whole life is complicated now, but I'm learning that complicated doesn't mean broken. It just means rich, with connections, with history, with love in all its messy, imperfect forms. Looking back at the past year, from the devastating engagement party to the discovery of my true identity, to reconnecting with my biological family, I realized that while I lost the perfect life I thought I had, I gained something perhaps more valuable: authenticity. I now know who I truly am, not just Samantha Reynolds, the privileged daughter of a business mogul, and not just Emily Mitchell, the stolen child of loving parents, but both. The sum of all my experiences, all my relationships, all the love I've given and received. The journey continues, of course. I still have moments of anger at Eleanor, moments of resentment toward Richard for how he handled things. I still struggle with the strange duality of feeling both at home and like a stranger when visiting Grand Rapids. But each day brings new understanding, new connections, new steps toward wholeness. If my story has taught me anything, it's that family isn't defined solely by blood or by upbringing. It's defined by love, by choice, by commitment. I've been extraordinarily fortunate to be loved by multiple families, even with all the pain and complication that is entailed. And as I move forward into this next chapter of my life, I carry all of these pieces with me, no longer afraid of the complexity, but embracing it as the beautiful, messy reality of who I am. Thank you for listening to my story. If there's one thing I'd love for you to take away, it's to cherish the relationships that truly matter in your life, whether they're defined by blood, by law, or simply by love. And remember that even the most difficult truths, when finally faced, can lead to healing and wholeness you never imagined possible. What unexpected discoveries have you made about your own identity or family? Drop a comment below and let's continue this conversation. Don't forget to like this video if my story touched you, and subscribe for more journeys of discovery and healing. I'm Samantha Emily Reynolds Mitchell, and thank you for being part of my story.